Hey, Fresh Fam. We are back with season 2 of Fresh Chats with Steph. I am so excited this year to be rolling out Fresh Chats with Dr. B. That's me. Okay. So this season, we have some pre-recorded and some of our sessions will be going live. I'm so excited to be back. We have some phenomenal educators and the platform is still the same. Here on Fresh Chats, we'll be talking to educators that are in the field doing this good work with students every day. From K through 12 to higher ed, we'll spotlight teachers and ask the questions that everybody wants to know. And so, if you would, buckle up and get ready for episode 1. All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Fresh Chats with Steph. I'm so excited to be here today with my brother, the man, the legend.
Oh man, I won't take a legend.
All of that,
you know
what I'm saying? Dr. Chris Emdin.
Yep.
Emdin.
What's good, y'all?
Emdin,
yup.
People call you Edmund. And
They
I'm
mess.
like, no,
people have so
Emdin.
many variations of that. They'll call me Edmin.
Yes.
Edmin, but it's Emdin. Emdin.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm so excited to be here at Columbia University.
Yep.
Now, your list of like what you do is so long that I'm gonna let you tell everybody what you do because professor is only like one part of it.
Yeah, so it's a little layered. So I currently serve as director of the science education program here at Teachers College at Columbia University. I'm also a faculty member, so I'm also a associate professor of science education. I am the associate director of the Institute for Urban and Minority Education. An alumni fellow at the Hutchins Center at Harvard University, co-founder of Hip Hop Ed and Science Genius, and husband, father, you know what I mean, and mentor to
author
young
of
folks.
Dope books, like everything.
Author a couple
you know,
joints.
the list
Yeah.
goes on and on and on. And so I'm so blessed to be here today with my brother doing this good work
Yeah.
here in the North. And so let's just dive right in. I have a couple of questions I want to ask you. So for those people who don't know or don't understand, tell them a little bit about what hip hop ed is and what it's all about.
So hip hop ed, we have to sort of have a larger umbrella question, right? So hip hop education is an area of inquiry that has existed since there's been hip hop. So I think hip hop education existed in the 1970s when Kool Herc was in the Bronx and throwing parties to make some money to send his little sister to school with fresh outfits. I think that was hip hop education, right? Because it was hip hop functioning in a way to create a space for those young people to be able to enter into an educational space and feel fully actualized, so they wanted to dress well and feel well, which helps them to be able to learn better.
Wow,
so to me, hip hop education is as old as hip hop.
Yeah.
And there have been folks in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s who've been playing with the idea of bringing hip hop into educational spaces or what it looks like to do hip hop in education. Hip hop ed is a consortium, a coalition of like-minded educators and activists who were really moving the idea of hip hop education into a more critical sphere. You know what I mean? And we gathered almost accidentally. I was online one day and I was just tweeting about Jay-Z's book Decoded that had just dropped, and I was talking about the intellectual value of Jay-Z and the academic value of Jay-Z's book. And there was a brother out in Connecticut by the name of Brandon Frame. A lot of folks don't know Brandon's work, but he does really great work.
Okay.
And he and I were the ones having this conversation. He worked in a school as an educator. So I'm tweeting, and this dude I don't know is like, yo, you saying some stuff, that's some heat. and then he's saying something, I'm like, yo, that's banging, bro. And then before long, we was like, yeah, this is hip hop education on a digital platform. And then we just used hashtag hip hop ed accidentally.
Gotcha.
And I enjoyed speaking with this brother so much. I'm like, yo, next week we should build. And so we got back the next week and we started using hashtag hip hop ed. And before long, that conversation grew. And people were like, yo, these brothers are saying something.
Yeah.
And then my brother Timothy Jones at TDJ6899 jumped on the conversation. And then before long, it just grew into this sort of community. And literally it was like, 3 months later, and we had like hundreds of people online, and it showed me that people were just thirsty about critically bringing hip hop into the classroom beyond the superficial, but into the critical. And so we moved from an online phenomenon into an offline platform and into a non-for-profit, and then sort of doing all these things with this idea of hip hop ed as a brand into doing really good critical work. So we have hip hop ed that does Science Genius. We have hip hop ed around counseling. We have hip hop ed around leadership, hip hop ed around English education, hip hop ed around social justice explicitly. But really it's just a coalition of people who have a criticality around their work in hip hop and education, who look to push beyond what already existed, and wanted to be able to bring work from the digital sphere into the actual sphere to transform the lives of young people, because we understand the power and the value of hip hop.
Absolutely, and people have been bringing hip hop into classrooms forever, and so to me it was awesome to see your platform, because what I feel like what you have done is a lot of people will look and see that one teacher is doing something awesome in the classroom, and they'll try to make it almost like it's just a phenomenon, like that one teacher knows how to do this one thing well.
That's right.
And so what I loved about your platform, when I happened upon you in the Twitter sphere, I was like, oh man, I need more. I felt like those people that you were saying were kind of thirsty. I was like, I clicked on one thing and I saw something you said. I was like, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Word.
Right? Because I was starting the Fresh Classroom in this movement where we're going into schools and we're training teachers on how do you take that content and marry it to the culture of the kids that you're serving already, so that you make meaningful connections to those kids, so that the learning is sustainable. And so when I happened upon your work, I was like, oh, this brother is dope. And I said the first time I started looking at something, I was like, oh, he's a professor. Oh, he's all these things. I was like, I'm gonna meet that brother.
That's love. That's
I
love.
gotta meet this man.
And can I also say, like, the idea of the Fresh Classroom and the concept and the construct of being in a space where you're out there in Dallas just trying to make these connections happen. And also being open enough to be able to identify people and movements and things that speaks to your thinking is something to be celebrated. And it's something to say, yo, that's dope work, sis.
Thanks.
And I think that's what hip hop ed tries to do. Like, we try to identify folks like you who are in these random spaces. I mean, we've got family. Somebody came from a conference yesterday from the Ukraine.
Wow.
People came from Toronto, from Colorado, from Cali, from Dallas. And what it reminds me of is that there are people like you, like, and movements like the Fresh Classroom, who are trying to do powerful things, and they're doing it in isolation. Or they're doing it with 2 or 3 people. And what happens is, if you're doing revolutionary work in isolation, within systems that are designed to ensure that revolutionary work is stifled, you will inevitably get lost.
You said something right there.
It's what happens.
You said something right there.
Yeah.
That is so true, because the work is hard.
It's hard.
And then when you come up against, so this is going to bring me to my next question. Because what happens is you're met with this resistance where it's, some people are very open. Some teachers say, I would like to connect to these kids better. I just don't know how. They'll take the tools that you give them and they will implement them. Some people, though, will push back and say, well, when you have these conversations, you're talking about students of color as if they are one monolithic group. And so what if you're assuming that all African American students, all Hispanic students are necessarily into hip hop culture in the first place?
I think there's a misperception of what hip hop culture is that argument is based on. So when people say, you're making an assumption that all kids are into hip hop, they think that we're talking about hip hop music. Or they think that we're talking about a very thin slice of even hip hop music. Hip hop is our culture. Hip hop has been hip hop before we named it hip hop. We named something hip hop in the 70s in the Bronx that get transplanted across the planet. But hip hop was in the blues. Hip hop was in slave narratives. Hip hop is in West African talking drums on the coast of Ghana. Hip hop, this idea of rhythm and movement and using the voice as an instrument, and this idea of conjuring up the spirit as the rhythms move to a certain space in the crescendo. What we have now in hip hop is a contemporary iteration of Afrocentric approaches to instruction. So if we look historically at how folks of color have been able to engage and teach and learn, they're doing what we advocate for with hip hop culture. When we're looking at Deep as the Rivers by Thomas Weber, that talks about classrooms in the slave quarter. We're talking about how slaves would be in the quarter, banging on pans, moving to a beat. You know, there's this one amazing line that he says in this sort of Negro narrative, and he said, you know, white folks go to church and can't crack a smile, but a Negro go to church and you hear him laughing for a mile. To me, that's bars. that's bars before hip hop bars, but it's also insight into the way that we engage in that. It's never been stoic. It's never been hyper structured. It's always been communal. It's always been with verve. It's always been with movement. And so when you say, yo, you're making an assumption that all black kids like hip hop, I'm saying no. I'm basing my work on a history that says that people of African descent teach and learn better when they're engaged in communal spaces where their music moves their souls. That music has been our therapy since the beginning of time. For you to say, oh my gosh, you're making an assumption that they love hip hop and that can't be instruction. I'm like, no, I'm functioning my information based on understanding of who we engaged with. And that hip hop is simply a contemporary iteration of an age-old practice. And that when I use hip hop, it speaks to the genetic predisposition to a communal understanding that is in our DNA. It's in our social DNA.
That's so good.
So I say that. I also say this. So when you teach in science, or you teach in math, or you teach in Shakespeare, whatever else it is, and it doesn't really align to the young folks who are in front of you, do you ever stop and say, oh my gosh, I can't teach this boring subject matter because it doesn't align to all kids? Are you saying that all kids are a monolithic block? I mean, the same critique that you use to be able to identify hip-hop culture as being on the margins is the same critique I could level against existing curriculum. So in many ways, I'm saying, well, maybe not every single kid loves everything about hip-hop, but I know that my research on hip-hop says it's an approach to instruction that benefits all children. So because of that, I'm willing to engage in that practice. Right. And your unwillingness to do so should then, if you don't want to make it for all kids, should also make you not want to do curriculum the same way or do instruction the same way. So we can level the same critique back. So, I mean, those are two very, to me, simplistic arguments about why this approach works. Nah, real talk. You know what I mean? Like those are just basic things.
That's just, just basic.
We can get more in depth about that that issue, right? Because we could talk about how marginalized populations, white, black, or otherwise, have, if you've been marginalized and oppressed over time, your music has always been your method for emancipation.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So whether you're talking about Jewish populations, whether you're talking about Muslim populations, whether you're talking about African populations, whether you're talking about the Maori in New Zealand, whether you're talking about the Aborigine in Australia, each of those populations that aren't necessarily hip hop have always utilized their cultural music as the avenue through which they found voice and the avenue through which they learned. Yeah. And so I can make an argument for hip hop because it is the music of the oppressed in the contemporary era. So if you're making an argument just for music for marginalized populations, and we identify the fact that youth of color have been marginalized by the criminal justice system, by the educational system, then it makes it essential then that we utilize hip hop.
Man. You see how that goes? And it goes so fast. Like you have to keep up. Like I'm sitting in a conference yesterday. Shout out Hip Hop Ed's second conference was yesterday.
Second
annual conference was yesterday. And it was so awesome. And I'm sitting there. And anytime you start going, it's like you gotta kind of buckle up your seatbelt, y'all, because once he start going, like you're trying to like stay with it, and it's so many jewels being like dropped at a time. You're like, ooh, that's good. Hey man, you just wanna just shout. You know what
sis,
I mean?
When the work is coming from your soul,
yeah.
You know what I mean? It ain't even a matter of like, a dropping of jewels. It's like it's a speaking a truth that the ancestors has placed in you. And I always tell my young scholars this, and I'm gonna tell you this, and other folks who are listening to this. It's like, listen, the role of the academic, the role of the scholar, is not to be able to understand the language and discourse of power. It is rather to be able to utilize that discourse to justify what we know instinctively and intuitively when we open ourselves up to the works and the words of our ancestors.
Man.
And so when we be like, yo, Chris, you dropping juice, I'm like, nah. What I've tried to do and what I'm consistently trying to do is open myself up to be a vessel through which the work and the words of our ancestors can flow through, while the language and the discourse of the oppressor that I've gained by going through the system is simply used to be able to be the vehicle through which the knowledge of our ancestors passed through.
But that's the struggle, right? And I'm kind of getting off a little bit, but I've been working on my PhD for 4 years. This is my last year. I'm about to graduate next month.
Hey.
I'm trying to,
Yeah.
get this. But my PhD is in educational leadership and policy studies. And so now I'm sitting here having gone through this program, learning about methodology and epistemology and all of these things, all the other ologies that I had to learn, writing this dissertation, only to get to the point where I feel like, and I was sharing with you, that my writing and my ways of understanding I kind of have to translate, if you will. When I get ready to write for my institution of higher learning, I have to translate like almost what I know, or I'll say something as a truth because I know it to be true because of my experience in schools as a student of color, and then as a teacher, and then as a leader, and now as a researcher in the same communities, right? I'm fully engulfed in this process, and I will have people challenge me that have never experienced any of it, and say, well, who said that? Well, I said it.
That's right.
And then so now I got to the point where I became a master of finding voices like yours, finding people in the literature where I had to dig and find stuff. Let me find, because I know it to be true, but now I have to find these things. And so for me, I feel like a lot of people kind of shy away. I know there was one other person in my cohort that was a person of color that graduated. I'm going to be the second. And so in my cohort. And so when you look at the people that dropped out of the program, the majority of them were people of color.
Always us.
It's so hard to try to reconcile those two. Dr. W.B. Du Bois talked about it when he talks about the dual self, right? There's a sense of double consciousness.
Indeed.
Always this warring idea, these striving, two things that you're trying to reconcile. You're trying to say, I want to speak the language of academia, but at the same time, I need to speak my truth. And for you to try to stifle that or muffle my truth makes me want to almost say, forget all of this. Y'all can have it. I'll go this way.
But we can't.
And we can't.
But we can't. And I think for the contemporary scholar in this space, we have to be able to understand Du Bois's notion of double consciousness, and then reconcile that with the fact that we're existing in a time where our dual understanding is now not a deficiency, but rather an asset. I think in a contemporary era, the dual identity, or I call it a hybridized identity in some of my work, is actually an asset and not a deficiency. If you get caught up in the structure and the nuance of how it gets done and view it as a problematic thing, it stifles. If you view it as a skill set, it opens up a space for freedom. And first of all, I just want to say to you too, like how much I commend. I think it's also important to consistently commend ourselves in what we do. So the fact that you went through that program and getting through it and graduating is a gift. It should be commended. But we also have to understand the chief goal of academia for folks of color is to rob them of their authenticity. The chief goal of the revolutionary within these spaces is to retain said authenticity.
I'm about to fall out on the floor.
It is what it is. Like once you go into the work understanding what the chief premise or goal of the institution is, then you have to ask yourself: is my pursuit of the degree for you to get the degree, or is it to be a revolutionary? Right. So if your goal is to be a revolutionary, then your mission is to retain authenticity in the midst of the robbing you of your identity. Right. So when you understand what that is and you go into it with that mission, then you're good to go. The reason why academics and activists go to get a PhD, let's be clear about that, right? The reason why we go to get a PhD is because it is a degree that has been identified as the terminal degree, which says that you have the ultimate amount of knowledge in this area of study.
Yes.
The reason why we do it is because it's been identified as, if you got that joint, then you lit. You out here, you got it, you have the power, right?
Yes.
What happens to us is we have to remind ourselves that the reason why revolutionaries and activists go towards the degree is because they've been silenced. So if you go and get the thing that they said is the ultimate marker of knowledge, then you can use what you had already and say, okay, now you're going to shut me down for what? So the goal of the degree is not to learn the language and the ideology and the philosophy and the theoretical frameworks and the phenomenology and all that. Like, we learn that shit. We know that shit is light work. It's simply to say, yo, I knew what I knew to begin with. Now I got the credential that you say is for the ones who know the most. So now you have to listen to me. That's the goal. Simple.
That's good, man.
So when you function in this space with that knowledge and that understanding, you win. I think a lot of scholars have not had, OGs to put them on a game. Not real talk, right? To be like, yo, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And the reason why we don't have OGs is because a lot of folks of color who's gone through the system have been so traumatized by it. They've been so brutalized by it that they feel as though, man, if I had to go through all this to get it, it wouldn't be fair if a young scholar came through and I gave them all the jewels and they could gloss over it. So there's this divide between a lot of the folks who are supposed to guide you through.
That's unfortunate.
Who are holding on to these jewels. And I say to them, like, that's some sucker shit, right? Anybody who knows anything about hip hop knows that sucker shit, right? It's a responsibility of the OGs to put folks on so they can win.
Yeah.
And, I've had a lot of conversations with scholars when I was coming up who I would see black scholars, you know what I mean? And I would try to get some tutelage and some advice, and they would dismiss me. And they would they'd be like, whatever else it is. And then, those same scholars, a couple years later, they want to, they want to rub shoulders, they want to do that. And I always say, like, and I always say to them when I engage with them, do you remember when we first met? And they always say no. And I would say, I came to you and said XYZ, and you treated me this way. And I'm going to do that different for the next scholar, but I want you to ensure that you know what you're doing by maintaining the system of oppression. And it's, Frantz Fanon talks about the replication of oppression. That's all it is. Folks who have power, the minute they have power, the first thing they know how to do is to replicate that oppression. Somebody has to stand in a way to interrupt that. You know what I mean? And I think we have a crop of scholars, Edmund Ashapalm, you know what I'm saying? The non-PhDs who are doing good work, the Timothy Joneses of the world, you know what I mean? My OG, Gloria Ladson, never was a scholar. Never was a scholar who did that sucker shit to me. Always embraced me and welcomed me and taught me and modeled for me.
She's on my list too.
She's the truth. That's my OG. I call her my academic mama.
First of all, we're not gonna glaze over the fact that you keep referring to like real professors as OGs.
We got it.
We're not gonna just gloss past that.
No, that language matters.
That's actually happening.
No, that language. Let me say why that language matters.
I'm an OG.
You're OG. Once you go through this joint, you're OG, and then you have to, as OGs, you know that OG means you have to have a responsibility too. You know what I mean? Nope. Not everybody in the hood. Some folks in the hood is just old people.
Bruh.
Some folks are just like, oh, this is an old head.
That's real.
Then some folks is OGs.
Yeah,
the difference between an old head and the OGs is the OGs put the youngers on the game.
And OGs put in work.
They put in work. If you ain't done that work, you can't be OG.
Yeah, no, you ain't the OG.
You know what I mean?
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I take that because that was one of my questions. I wanted to know like what advice you would give to people doing this work, especially in the field of culturally relevant instruction and teaching, and trying to take it from theory to practice. Because to me, I was a teacher in the classroom, seeing success with the students in my classroom in isolation, bringing in things that I knew were relevant to the students. I mean, this was just something you did. You see something, I'm teaching English, and I know we're about to do persuasive writing, and I know there's something going on. Okay, we're going to talk today about this issue with Chris Brown and Rihanna. Now, this, when that was popping off.
You have to.
So now this is what the police report says.
Yeah.
Now this is what we see in the pictures. This is what we know already about. Okay, so we're going to do a little research here, and then now we're going to prepare a case. And so I'm going to bring in things that I naturally know that they just care about in this moment. And so then I started to work on my master's, and I got into some research like, oh, there's this thing about culturally responsive instruction. I started reading it. I'm like, oh, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And so then I want to read more.
Yeah.
And then in my PhD, I want to write about it. I want to study it. And I got so deep in it that I feel like if there were other people that knew what these tools were, we could give it to them. There's so much here in the theory. So much here in the theory that we can connect to the practice.
Absolutely.
But teachers are not going on to read an article in a database that they can't access anyway because they don't have access to it.
But educators, scholars have a responsibility to be able to make those connections for them. And do you know Tandy Hicks Harper?
No.
So that's another one. You just need to know who she is. She need to be on your list.
Okay.
And at the last AERA, American Educational Researchers Association, she and I just sat and had a conversation. She had never been to AERA, and she's a scholar, hip hop scholar.
I haven't been for that reason because
there's a lot of stuff going on in that space. Okay. I wouldn't necessarily say you need to go there unless you needed it. Yeah. But we'll talk about that later.
Gotcha.
But we were having this conversation, and she was in the middle of a talk, and she said something about, people talk about in research and academia how you need evidence-based research. She said, what about intuition? What about intuitive evidence? I think that's what you're describing. The nature of teacher preparation in academia also robs you of your intuition. So it's essential that we work and function with a place of protecting our intuition and constructing educational theories around intuitive practice. Yes. To me, that's what cultural relevant pedagogy is.
Exactly.
It's really, you know what it is when you in there and you with them and you connect it what's right to do.
Yeah.
That's intuition. How do we construct pedagogies that's transferable, that value the intuitive evidence that folks of color who've experienced it has? And I think it also, this part of this also is, you got to be a little, and I've learned this in the last couple of years in academia, you got to be a little unapologetic. Like, you can't be a sucker in academia.
Sucker.
Nah, real shit. Like,
that's an academic term for those of y'all.
Yeah, no, it is. Sucker. Like, if you're in the hood, you know what sucker-ish is. You know what I mean? Like, and you can't be a punk, because if you are a punk, you're gonna get punked. Point blank, period. Meaning, if you are not affirmed, deeply entrenched in a belief in what you're there to do, and what you're there to do it for, and the folks that you are drawing from, and the value of your intuitive evidence, you're going to be confronted with folks that discount you. And the minute you get discounted, if it doesn't have a firm footing, you're going to fall to pieces. Like, you got to be strong and staunch, and you got to be unapologetic. And that's why I always tell folks, like, you got to bring your hoodness, your ratchetness, whatever you want to call it, whatever that is, you got to bring that to the academic space and identify that and connect that with your academic self. So, I got a TEDx talk on being ratchetemic, right? How you are concurrently as ratchet as your academic. Like, I always give a shout out to all the brilliant scholars who do work around ratchetness, and black women scholars who do powerful work, like, in particular, like Brittany Cooper. I just love what she does with interrogating what it is to be ratchet. And I think that we also have to do a good enough job also welcoming how we talk about how that thing merges with being a full academic self. Now, don't get it twisted. You can't be full ratchet in academic spaces with no academic grounding. That's as much as being a sucker as being too academic with no authenticity. So it has to be this delicate merging of both identities that are essential, and that allows you to be able to hold on to your intuition. And if you hold on to your intuition, then you can hold on to good practice.
That's
right? That's how you bridge theory and practice by holding on to intuition, right? And then enacting or finding academic justification for what you know is intuitive. So rather than finding the academic work that you're supposed to know, you find out who you are and you find the academic work that supports that.
And that's exactly what I feel like I've had to do, digging into it. But now then there comes this issue when you get ready to transfer that and you try to teach others. So then what I do is go into schools and go into districts and do a training. Well, I am trying to then teach other teachers how to do this, and I'm showing them like real life examples of what does that look like in the classroom, showing them lessons while I brought in Drake or Tupac and we done old school versus new school and all these kind of things, and to show them what it looks like, to show them what the data. We start with the theory. This is why it's important. This is, read an article, understand that. Now let's see, what does that look like when you incorporate it in the classroom. Let's talk about your students. Let's talk about what it's going to look like for you and yours, because all students are different.
And know yourself.
And then what are you bringing into it in your own biases that you brought into it in the first place? Because I've had people, and I mean, I can straight out say at this point, I've been in some schools. You can tell when you're delivering to people if they are receiving you, or if they're shutting you out, and thinking of reasons why what you're saying is wrong. And the instances where I can tell I have a total shutdown person has always, in my experience, been a white male. And I'm not saying that that's the only people, but in my experience so far, to where even one of them raised his hand and kind of even pushed back, like, well, what you're saying is, you know, and to really get into it.
And in that moment, you got to say, no, that's not, and this is what I mean about, you can't be, it is. Yo, it is essential for us to be able to interrupt those narratives the minute they come and say, no, that is not what I'm saying. When I'm finished my workshop, you'll understand what I'm saying. And also, and we also have to understand there's a lot, you know, I talk to a lot of folks who do like, you know, I'm training on culturally relevant and culturally sustaining pedagogy or whatever else it is. And I'm like, yo, there's no training without an appropriate framing. Say that again because it's essential. There's no training without an appropriate framing. You can give folks the stuff I would do or the lesson plans.
Yes.
That's great. But you got to have a larger framework around the pedagogy that you're sharing that they can always hang their hat back on so they don't get lost. So, like, that's why we talk about reality pedagogy as an essential thing. And when I talk about reality pedagogy, I'm not saying reality pedagogy is necessarily a departure from culturally relevant pedagogy. It is an approach, though, that says, listen, I understand that culturally relevant pedagogy is important. I also understand that everybody thinks they have an idea of somebody else's culture. And that if you're functioning with your perception of the culture as you're implementing a culturally relevant pedagogy, the pedagogy is inherently flawed because it is skewed through the lens of your biased perception of what the culture is.
Right.
And if you can't trouble that first, you ain't got nothing.
Yeah.
So reality pedagogy says, okay, what are these practical things that I can do every day in addition to the lessons that help me to be able to unearth my biases and understand the students. So we got to have a C, cogenerative dialogue. We got to dialogue with the students about where they're from. It allows me to be able to be vulnerable with them. We have to have a co-teaching where I sit back and let the kids teach me. You know what I'm saying? I have to, and study what they're teaching and utilize that in my teaching. I have to have a cosmopolitanism. Like, how do I create a classroom environment where everybody feels like they have the role and responsibility and are comfortable how things run, and how am I deliberate about that? I have to have a context. Know that, listen, every hood is different. Dallas different than the Bronx, is different from wherever else it is. And so how do I utilize the context where I'm embedded as a necessary anchor? Content. How do I marry my context to my content? Because sometimes what is culturally relevant in science is different when it's English, and it's different from the social studies. So how do I utilize the content in that space, right? Context, content. How do I use competition, a lot of battles, to be able to conjure up something that's emotional? So anyway, a reality pedagogy framework allows you then to be able to have a framing for the training to support the lessons and the anecdotes that you're providing.
Right.
And a lot of folks who do this work fail to give folks those framing, and when you don't, then they come with that, they come with these excuses. Nah, you need a frame to use this around so that your excuse for why it should not work is eliminated completely. And it has to have a research base also.
Right.
Because then, a lot of these suckers also be like, yo, but my this person said da 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 da. No. This framework, cite me, cite GLB, you know what I mean?
Right.
Cite Sami Alim and Django Paris and them. So that you know there's a research base, there's an appropriate framing, there's an appropriate pedagogy, so you know to get to an appropriate practice.
Right.
And if you don't have that pyramid, you can tell them good stuff all day, it ain't gonna catch.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Framing before the training.
Absolutely.
That's good. So tell me about what's been your greatest success thus far.
Oh man, in the work or just generally? So it's two distinct.
In the work.
In the work. I think in the work, it's nuanced. But I would say the rise and the visibility and the depth of the work of those I mentor have been my biggest success. I mentioned Emdin of Columbia. We actually co-authored a book and co-hosted this conference.
Yes.
You know, to seeing his evolution as a scholar and as a thinker. I taught him in high school, so I was his high school physics teacher.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
I was his high school physics teacher, and then I saw him through college, and I was an anthropobiochemist, so he wanted to be a biochemist, so he graduated a biochem degree and recruited him to Columbia for his master's and his second master's and his third master's and then his doctorate.
Oh my lordy.
And then to see him now as a professor in his own right, at Seton Hall University, who can hold court and can use his experiential knowledge and his academic knowledge. I mean, that to me is a gift. I think about Mario Bernabe. He was a young man I taught in the 7th grade.
Oh, wow.
I taught him math and science in the 7th grade. And right now he's a national speaker. And he was talking. He couldn't come to the conference yesterday because he was keynoting the conference in Vegas.
Oh.
Right? And to see him bring folks together and understand the work, and somebody that you taught. Think about Ian Levy and his work now as a professor at Manhattan College in the tenure track position. I think about Gifty Asamani, who's a recent, woman of color, sister, on fire with this work. Just recently got her doctorate. So I could spot them off. I've been in academia for 10 years.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, 10 years in, I have mentees and folks that I've influenced and impacted who are doing the damn thing.
Yeah.
I think that's my biggest accomplishment.
Yeah. That's pretty dope, man.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And let me say, you look young.
Hey, thank you, man.
I taught them and now they professors.
I appreciate that. You know what I mean? Like, I got in the game a little early, but I'm 10 years deep, man. It's going to be my 10th year in academia.
That's good work, man.
And so, I feel like in many ways I've learned so much. I wish I'd known a lot of stuff that I know now when I first got in, but I've been able to navigate this world, not perfectly, but I've always kept my mission. I've always known why I'm here. It wasn't never about all this, right? I always knew that it was about my people, it was about my young people. It was about engaging and utilizing this platform to be able to set folks free. And let folks who were free know that they're free. That's another piece of it. There's a lot of folks who's free, but because of the incarceration of the mind, the spirit, and the soul and body that schooling does, they don't even recognize that. It's like, the emperor wearing invisible clothes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, nah, yo, you free, yo. You know what I mean? I let these cats know you brilliant, yo. Like, you from the hood, you brilliant automatically. Yeah. You got grit, fam. You didn't even know you had grit. Yeah. They're telling you that they teaching you grit, and you been had grit. This idea of letting folks know the magic they are, it's been a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That reminds me of Yasso has a article out about, what does she call it? She calls it community cultural wealth. And she talks about how people from all these communities of color come to schools with all these different forms of capital, aspirational capital, the language capital, all these different forms of capital that they bring that are just not even recognized as a thing.
Yep.
And so when you see them come into classrooms, it's almost like if the person that is in the classroom, that is the instructional leader, does not even understand that to be a form of capital. It's almost like it's invisible.
It's a word.
It's crazy because I tell people all the time, you will see students so responsible sometimes. They had to wake up, they had to make sure little brother had some breakfast. They had to drop off their siblings at school before they can. All these different forms of capital that you don't even see if you don't understand it. You can't tap into it. But anyway.
And in the new book, that's because know what it is. We oftentimes say, "Yo, wouldn't it be amazing if these teachers could recognize his brilliance?" And I say, yes, but wouldn't it be even more amazing if those folks recognize that brilliance? And that's the part that I think we miss a lot.
That's good.
And that's the next level. Because if that young person who's waking up early, picking up baby early, because they're just doing that and they're living. And stop for a second. Do you understand how dope you are?
No, really.
Yeah, I mean, do you understand how brilliant you are?
Like, you're a leader. Like, did you realize you were a leader?
And once they get that and they understand that, I'm like, yo, if you can flip that, school's light work.
Yeah.
Then they come alive. And I think it's that new framing. And so, like, I'm really excited about this joint I'm penning because it takes it from that lens and helps to reimagine schooling. So it's almost like a bookend to for I wrote the first one like for white folks who teach in the hood and the rest of y'all too.
Yeah.
And I feel like this one right here is like for the folks themselves. You know what I mean? What they need to know.
Right.
And so I'm psyched about it, but I feel like we missed that piece.
I felt like your title for that first book was so unapologetic. Like the first time I saw it, I was like, "Ooh, can you say that?"
Yeah, but you gotta be that, and just don't get it twisted. It ain't like it just came out and folks was like, "Yay, what a fascinating title!"
Right.
Like I got the pushback, I got the emails, you're racist. I got the colleagues that look at me twisted. You know what I mean? I get all that, but it had to be named that deliberately because. In the hood, where young folks of color are populated, an overwhelming majority of the educators are white. And not only are they white folks. I think, your whiteness and being white folks is a thing. There's a whole history around the narrative of Langston Hughes' book about white folks that talked about all these stories of black folks' interactions with white folks where they didn't understand who they were. It had to be white folks. Mm-hmm. We had to name it the hood because people think of the hood as pejorative, and it's not. I want to say, not white folks who educate in urban spaces. Nah, white folks who teach in the hood. That shit matters. You know what I mean? And then the rest of y'all too. And the rest of y'all too. Folks of color who in many ways believe in white supremacist ideologies and hold them up. So it had to be, and the rest of y'all too. All of that was deliberate, and I think it had to be unapologetic because we had to be unapologetic.
I remember the first time I had a friend that asked me one time at the end of a conversation about, well, who would you recommend I read? Of course, my book, The Fresh Classroom, is coming next year. But
who publishing that?
In the I don't know yet, but
let's talk off the camera about that.
Yeah. But in the meantime, I did refer him to your book and some other ones, and I would never forget when his books came in, and he took a picture and sent it to me like, I got my book, and it was like for white folks to teach.
That's love.
Just like. Yeah, I'm glad that you chose that one. So, but I appreciate that. So, my last question is, in 10 years, when you look down the road, where do you see hip-hop ed, the movement,
everywhere.
Everything?
Everywhere. Listen, you was at this conference yesterday.
I was.
And, I don't want to just talk greasy, but, facts are facts. You know what I mean? Like, what we and it's not me. I always say we. Never me, always we. Yeah. But what we did, what Tim and Emil and Ian and Eb and Derek and Sophia and Bev and like what we did is we brought to an Ivy League institution. Like we had a conference where people were talking about academic work while Pusha T was bumping in the hallways. Yeah. And as you were talking your academic talk, you could hear the rhythm and the bass permeating through the walls. And it was not a distraction. It was an accentuation. So just aesthetically, sonically, we was rocking our hoodies and our t-shirts, you know what I mean? And our buttons without apology. We were celebrating sisters in a way that was amazing. Napoleon Wells in the beginning had a session where we all had to do some therapy work and own ourselves, you know what I mean? We had young folks who were spitting. We had battle rappers in the building, and we were at an Ivy League institution pushing. Yeah. And I think once we've gotten to that hiatus, what's next? That becomes a norm. Is what's next. 10 years from now, that's gonna be like, yo, them kids in New York was wilding. Nah, in every city across the country, we'll be doing this exact same work. Science Genius will be in every school as a norm. You know what I'm saying? Hip hop ed will be a common name and knowledge. It would have its own curriculum, its own standards, we will have hip hop ed schools. We will have our own everything. And I think that 10 years from now, I really firmly from the depths of my soul believe, and I said this at the Hip Hop Ed conference last year, and I think folks sometimes when I talk, they think I'm tripping. And I say, yo, 30 years from now, they're going to be like, yo, in 2017, 2018, when that stuff was really catching root, what were you doing? Mm-hmm. Like, were you, like how they be like, yo, were you at the march?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In 68? You know what I mean? Like, they're going to be like, where was you at?
Yeah.
Because we're in the midst of a revolution.
Definitely.
And you can feel it in your bones. When the kids are spitting, you get the goosebumps. You know what I mean?
It was definitely good energy, man. The energy was like everything yesterday. And I mean, you would think when you go to a conference, it starts in the morning. I had to be here at 9 because I was presenting a session, one of the paper presentations. But you would think being somewhere from 9 in the morning to 6 p.m., you'd be like, man, is it time to go yet? Like, by the time first of all, it ended. Let me just say that they were on time, too. Like, for African American, I go to a lot of conferences. They were on time, and it ended like a little early.
Yeah.
But even then, like, just to be in there, it was like, okay. Like, it wasn't like, man, is this conference almost
People
over?
were asking my wife, they were like, yo, where's the after party?
Oh, I asked that question.
Where's the after event? Are y'all doing a part 2?
No,
Can
y'all
we stay till
definitely
tomorrow?
have to get for the grown-ups need them.
We gonna get it done next year. Next year we're gonna do a nice after party. But
Okay.
like people are still thirsty. People still want to learn,
Yeah.
and that's how you know you're in the middle of something special.
And the learning was good. Like it's good. It was good academic learning going on. That's the thing to me. I feel like. Who says how our conferences have to look? I'm
That's
trying
right.
to host my first like 1-day workshop, and I have a vision in my head. There's a DJ inside the main presentation space. Like there's a backdrop, there's pictures and selfies and food and fun. And why can't we have it? Why do we have to come buttoned up, laced up, and be stuffy and boring and cold all day? Like, why can't I bump Cardi B if I feel like I like it like that?
And we
like,
should,
why?
and that's what we try to do. Like, we had 2 DJs yesterday.
Yeah.
We had a sister DJing, we had a brother DJing.
Yeah,
we had music, like, and it matters. It matters for us because we feel whole with that, and so we don't have to. Not anymore, man. As long as I'm doing this work, we are no longer going to be. You use respectability as the enemy of our revolutionary work, right? We're not going to stifle our creativity, our imagination
You gotta
anymore.
say that part one more time because it's how people make you feel.
Nah, man. Respectability is the enemy of progressive pedagogy. It always has and always will be. The notion that you have to act, look, sound, talk a certain way and incarcerate your freedom, right, is the enemy of you being able to do good work. And so we have to lead with our most raw self first. And that's what we gonna do. That's what this movement doing. That's what you doing.
I appreciate that, man.
And that's the work.
And that's empowering, man.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you
for love.
taking time to sit with me today,
man. On a Sunday, it's a gift. I appreciate you. I can tell you have a passion for the work, so I'm glad we were able to get it done.
Thank you so much.
No doubt.
Fresh Chats with Dr. B is brought to you by thefreshclassroom.com. Are you ready to get fresh? If so, head to our website.